What is up, Redwood AP? Mr. Vieira coming at you with my boy, Mr. Eskridge.
Hey, hey.
We are going to cover Chapter 11, Manifest Destiny. We will begin with this painting, American Progress. And in this painting, this covers a lot of what we are going to be covering. Manifest Destiny deals in large part with westward movement, west of the Mississippi River. And you can see we have all sorts of kind of imagery here, the progress of the railroad, the telegraph, covered wagons, and then also as progress is moving in and technology is moving in, you can see in the bottom left-hand side, not the bear, but the group that is being pushed farther and farther west and farther away from their land, the Native Americans. So we're going to get into this. So we'll begin with this idea of manifest destiny. Manifest destiny was a belief at the time that the U.S. needed to expand its democracy, that it was destined to be a nation that stretched from sea to shining sea. And so manifest destiny wasn't like it was coined by a gentleman by the name of John O'Sullivan. But it's not like a speech per se or a doctrine. It's more of a philosophy. Okay, it says quasi-religious belief. So it's a philosophy that Americans held at the time about why they should expand. So we break it down into three different kind of roots. The first is that American values justified this like moral idea that they had claims to be the leader in the Western Hemisphere. That American values were somehow superior to the rest of the Western Hemisphere, and as a nation, it needed to spread and kind of influence the rest of this hemisphere. Second was that this kind of Jeffersonian idea that the West was going to be the future of America, that this political and agricultural improvement would make the United States a greater nation and would bring that its progress to the rest of the world. And then lastly, God wanted us to. This American belief that God had ordained the United States to democratize the rest of the world. And this is where the philosophy of American exceptionalism begins to come in, that America was this exceptional nation that God looked with favor upon, and it needed to spread to the rest of the world. So continuing on, Manifest Destiny, although it had its benefits for the United States of America and for white settlement, it was also met with some pretty disastrous impacts. First off, Manifest Destiny takes place at the expense of Native American claim to land along the Great Plains leading up to the Rocky Mountains and even to parts of California. Critics view Manifest Destiny as a type of American imperialism. And American imperialism wasn't exactly something that the entire nation supported. Now, Manifest Destiny will be more common and more widely supported amongst Southerners, and that really is in large part due to the issue of slavery, that as we were able to expand west as a nation, that the United States system of slavery could also expand with it, therefore giving Southern states more power to expand their political and economic system. So again, we're going to talk more, and I'm going to turn it over to Eskridge here in a second. He's going to cover Indian removal, but probably the single greatest sin, if you will, of Manifest Destiny is the treatment of Native Americans along the plains and in parts of the South in the Ohio River Valley. So here's your boy, Eskridge.
Hey, guys. All right, so I'm just going to pick up and really talk about Indian removal and how that is motivated, as Vieira said, by Manifest Destiny. And we've seen this idea of Manifest Destiny even before it was named throughout the course so far, and this idea that, you know, the United States, or what would become the United States, the colonies, was this beacon on a hill, and it was the goal of the United States to push westward and to claim these unutilized native lands. And so in the 1830s, we're starting to see this continue, and we're starting to see Congress and the government take a more active role in actually removing Indians. So it's not so much just people out on the frontier having these battles and conflicts and driving Native Americans further west. If they survive those conflicts. But we're seeing the Congress in 1830 passes the Indian Removal Act, which transplants about 100,000 Indians and basically gives the executive branch, the president, the authority to push Native Americans out of any lands that Americans see that may be valuable for agricultural, for mining, basically for resource extraction. And kind of one of the more notable or more brutal instances of this is down in the South, where we have the Cherokee Nation. And the next slide, we'll talk more about the Trail of Tears. But it's just interesting to note, and you'll read about this, how the Cherokee Nation and numerous tribes that had been in contact with the white settlers, Anglo settlers, for a long time, had started to adopt their culture, adopt some of their customs, and we see this kind of blending with Native American culture and Anglo-Saxon or Anglo-European culture. And so, for the most part, these Cherokee people and these other tribes, the Seminoles, the Choctaws, others are doing their best to assimilate. They're doing their best to hold on to the land that they have, and they see that the best way to do that is to become more American, and then maybe they would be accepted by the Americans. But the Congress and settlers were just not willing to recognize those things. So we start to see the Cherokee Nation start to use the court system to try to win over their war, not their war, but their land. And ultimately, the Supreme Court is going to rule in favor of the Cherokee, but it doesn't stop the executive branch from removing them and forcing them out of their land. So the Trail of Tears is a very horrific event, and it's going to be just one event in this history of Indian removal. It wasn't the first, and it certainly will not be the last violence and force that is inflicted upon Native American communities. So in 1838, President Van Buren, who followed Jackson, forcibly removes the Cherokee still living in Georgia and moves them into what will become Oklahoma, or what is known as Indian Territory. And even if you look at the Oklahoma state flag today, it has some Native American symbolism on it. And about an eighth of the Cherokee Nation that was forced upon that march perished, unfortunately. And they did not go, silently. They did not go without fighting back. And many Native American tribes continue to push back against European expansion, or not European, but American expansion, done under the guise of Manifest Destiny. And so these ideas of removal and Americanization reinforce Americans' sense of cultural dominance, that ultimately the American culture, the white Anglo-American culture, was going to win the day in the face of pretty much any culture that resisted them. And so here's just a map that shows Native territory, and we're starting to see, as we move out past the Mississippi into Louisiana and Arkansas, we're starting to see different resources that are out there, and we do see this progression. We have settlers moving out, as we saw in that initial image. We have the settlers, the fur trappers, the frontiersmen that move out and they start to lay claim. And then we have more settled folks travel behind in search of that American dream, in search of getting land, which not only gives people economic viability, but as we've seen, land equates to political power as well. So these are just kind of interesting to note, and we'll go into much more this week about this stuff. So,
all right. So let's talk about life on the frontier. Now, this is we're going to specifically focus on kind of the family unit and what life was like on the American frontier for these early settlers moving west of the Mississippi River. So starting off with women. One of the unique facts about life on the frontier is that there was more demand for manual labor in constructing the homestead, in tilling the land on these frontier farms than there was in the North or in the South. And so as a result of that, American women had more opportunities and rights than their Eastern counterparts. And this is going to transition to more political rights earlier on than, say, women on the East Coast, or especially in the South, were experiencing. But the fact that American women were more likely to be found on the frontier working outside of the household, working on the family farm, working alongside men, gave them certain rights and privileges that women who were living in urban areas or more of the southern rural plantation society didn't experience. Now, with that being said, women were still forced and kind of pressured into maintaining some of the societal norms that women had in America in the 19th century. A lot of the farming practice that is going to take place along the frontier in Kansas, Nebraska territory, and farther west is sustenance farming. People were growing what they needed. You're far less likely to see plantation agriculture west of the Mississippi River, although slavery did exist in places like Missouri, Arkansas, and then later Kansas, Nebraska has its whole issue, which we will discuss in the next unit. But it was more likely to find a smaller farm. A lot of this westward expansion is driven by Manifest Destiny, but it is also influenced by government spending. The United States of America focuses on building a national road, which is the first highway that kind of connects the Ohio River Valley to eastern markets. Canals also help speed up the pace of westward expansion. And so it's driven, Manifest Destiny is not only an American ideology that is in the heart of white America, it is also something that is being invested in and spent on by the U.S. House of Representatives, Senate, and the executive branch. So we're going to transition here, and we are going to talk about Texas. For whatever reason, College Board puts especially important influence on the state of Texas, which, whatever. It's the Lone Star State, so I guess it gets its own little special part here. But let's talk about Texas. So Texas is the original state of Texas was the state of Mexico. Now, the Mexican government encourages white settlement in the territory or state of Texas. And so Americans start to move into the Mexican state of Texas. Now, when these individuals are moving in, they're in large part coming from the south, and in large part they're bringing their slaves with them. The one major problem with that is in Mexico, slavery is officially outlawed. So Texas goes through its own little revolution, which we are not really going to cover all that much, the Lone Star Rebellion. But
remember the Alamo?
Yeah, the Alamo, boom, Davy Crockett, somebody has a big knife, something like that. And so it becomes an independent nation. Now, the Europeans take a lot of interest in Texas. It'll stop American growth. It'll oppose the Monroe Doctrine, which we're going to talk about. But probably the most important thing, and this all kind of goes back to how important cotton was in the 19th century, was that they would be able to use the state of Texas as a competitive market against American cotton. And so obviously the United States of America takes interest. And in 1845, the U.S. House of Representatives votes to annex the state, or the, I guess, country of Texas, to make it a state. And so in 1845, Texas becomes an American state. And as a result of that, Mexico breaks off its diplomatic relations with the United States, all but ensuring that those two nations are going to go to war.
All right, guys. So as Mr. Vieira alluded to, the fact that the United States had backed its own people in the Texas Revolution, and then ultimately annexed Texas into the part of the United States, Mexico was going to fight over that because they did not see that as a legitimate takeover of Texas by the people that had won during the Texas independence movement, nor by the Americans. So we really have kind of reluctance on both sides, in Mexico and in the United States, to go to war. But we have President Polk, who is kind of a warmonger. He wants to make a name for himself. He wants to kind of have, he's certainly very steeped in this idea of manifest destiny and American exceptionalism and American power. And so what he does, really to invoke Mexico into starting a war, he sends a small force into Mexico under General Zachary Taylor. And remember that name, that's going to be one of the many names that we'll be introduced to that we'll learn more about or look more at during the Civil War. And it sends them into Mexico, and we have some kind of border skirfs, or not skirfs, skirmishes. There we go. I don't know.
Scripts is not a word.
Scripts is not a word. You'll not find it on your key terms. Skirmishes. And so war is declared in 1846, and we have not a lot of battles, but and as the text points out, more people, more fight, more troops died of disease than they actually died of combat. But what the Mexican-American War really results in is the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which basically forces Mexico to hand over pretty much the northern half of their territory and what we think of as pretty much the rest of the United States, aside from the Oregon Territory. Up in the Northwest. And so that gives the United States California, New Mexico, and the border of the Rio Grande, Arizona, and other states like that. And so just put that in your head that the introduction of these new states and where they're located is really going to cause more divisions, just like we saw in Missouri, over whether or not these states should be pro-slavery or free. And so just kind of keep that in your head there. Okay, so here we just see movement out into the West. And so we're starting to see these different portions of what will become the United States, the continental United States at least. And we'll see when they become part of the U.S. And you guys will work on that this week as well. Okay, so California is known famously for its gold rush. And in 1848, gold is discovered on John Sutter's sawmill. And after that, word just spreads really quickly east and really throughout the world. And we have just massive amounts of people migrating to California in search of gold. The placer deposits, or the surface level gold that was available, dried up pretty quickly, and most miners find nothing. But what it really does is it makes California, really starts to set California on this stage to be one of the leading economic and populated states that it is today. And about 95% of the immigrants are single men. We have a lot of crime, as you can imagine, a lot of young men that are bored and not really realizing the glory that they thought they would be finding in the gold fields, then have to kind of strut their stuff and flex on other people. So
I have a nerdy
yeah, let's get it.
Story. So many of the people that came to the gold rush, they went through San Francisco right here, right? Okay, obviously everybody in California knows where San Francisco is. And many of the men that came were not dressed appropriately to mine for gold in Sierra Nevadas, much less the foothills. And so there was a shortage of mining appropriate clothing. This one gentleman realizes that there's all sorts of ships that are in San Francisco Harbor, because most people would just come into San Francisco Harbor, abandon their ship, and just go up and mine gold. And so what he does is he starts cutting down all the sails, and he starts hemming pants out of them. And these
cotton sails.
Yeah, these pants sell like crazy. That guy's name is Levi Strauss. And so the Levi's that most of you guys wear to school all day that we see are literally, that guy started his business by robbing people. But that relates directly to what we're kind of going over here. Levi Strauss pretty much stole from people, made jeans, and now you're all wearing illegal clothing.
And just like Levi Strauss finds his wealth in that, that's really who got really rich during the gold rush, was the merchants, the people that opened up shop to provide for all these people that are coming in for mining, food, materials, all those different aspects. So those are the merchants are the ones that really strike gold during the California gold rush.
So just to wrap up on California, because we're going to punt California down to 1850, which we'll talk about in the next unit when we talk about slavery. But California Constitution, which is, fun fact, also written in English and Spanish, bans slavery in the territory. And so California will not be added as a state until they resolve the issue of slavery and how California is going to be counted as a free state or as a slave state. So again, here you go. Some parts of our state, which I'm sure some of you have traveled to, maybe you have family living in those areas, but most of the gold that's found in California is found north of our current location in the Sierra Nevadas. And you can see Sutter's Mill right there, northeast of Sacramento. So we'll talk about Manifest Destiny very briefly, the global ramifications of it. So the one key, just to wrap up real quick, the Monroe Doctrine, basically what it says is the Western Hemisphere is off limits to European colonization. More importantly, what that says is this is now the United States sphere of influence. The Western Hemisphere is going to be the USA's backyard, and you need to stay out of it. That's basically the message that John Quincy Adams is giving to the rest of the world. This is an important moment in American history because the United States, we had warned about foreign entanglements with George Washington. John Adams had avoided going to war with France. This is a country that time and time again in the first 70 to 100 years of its history had tried to avoid as much as it could foreign entanglements. And here is, under President Monroe, John Quincy Adams basically saying, hands off, leave this alone. This is our turf. And that's a really kind of a little bit of a change in America's foreign policy. Now, he's obviously going to be criticized for this, for its imperialistic rhetoric, and the fact that this seems to be the United States maybe pushing for an expansion of slavery, maybe looking to invest more money in the military, which a lot of the states were very scared of that prospect of a strong federal national military at this time. But that's kind of the importance of the Monroe Doctrine.
So again, just kind of pay attention to what the United States actions during this time and how we're going to see, certainly after the Civil War, when the United States becomes an imperial power leading up to World War II, and a lot of the seeds of American imperialism that's going to lead us into World War II ultimately against the Japanese really is rooted here in these ideas of manifest destiny. So have a good weekend, and we'll see you all on Monday.